The summer heat pressed down on Rome like a weight, but inside the austere household of the Porci, a different kind of pressure was building. Young Marcus Porcius Cato, barely 5 years old, stood before his uncle Livius Drusus, with his small fists clenched at his sides. "No," the boy said simply. The slave holding the sweetmeats looked uncertainly at Drusus, who was trying very hard not to smile. Every other child in Rome would have snatched the treats eagerly, but not this one, not Cato. "Why not?" Drusus asked, though he already knew the answer. "You're testing me," Cato replied, his young voice steady, "to see if I can be bought with pleasures." At that moment, watching this unusual child reject comfort on principle alone, Drusus understood something profound. This boy would either save Rome or die trying. There would be no middle ground. There never was with Cato. Born in 95 BCE into one of Rome's most distinguished families, Cato entered a world that was tearing itself apart. The republic that had stood for centuries was beginning to crack under the weight of its own success. Generals commanded personal armies. Politicians bought votes openly. The old ways, the mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors, were becoming quaint relics in a city drunk on conquest and gold. But in the house of Porcius, the old ways still mattered. Cato's father died when he was young, and his mother soon after. Orphaned, he was raised by his uncle Drusus, a man who believed in the republic the way priests believe in gods. Every morning, before the sun rose over the 7 hills, Drusus would wake young Cato for their lessons. "What is virtue?" Drusus would ask. "Living according to nature and reason," Cato would respond, parroting the Stoic philosophers his uncle revered. "And what is vice?" "Anything that corrupts the soul or betrays principle." These weren't just words to memorize. They were a code to live by, a shield against the corruption all around them. But knowing virtue and living it are two different things entirely. When Cato was 14, his uncle Drusus was murdered, stabbed in his own home by an assassin's blade, killed for trying to extend citizenship to Rome's Italian allies. The boy found him bleeding out in the atrium, his life pooling across the marble floor. Most 14-year-olds would have been destroyed by such trauma. Cato stood over his uncle's body, tears streaming down his face, and made a vow. He would finish what Drusus started. He would save the republic, no matter the cost. From that day forward, Cato trained himself like a soldier preparing for war. But his battlefield wasn't foreign soil, it was the human soul itself, starting with his own. While other young aristocrats spent their days at the baths and their nights at banquets, Cato studied philosophy under the Greek Stoics who had made Rome their home. He read Zeno and Chrysippus until he could recite their teachings from memory. He learned that the only true good was virtue, and the only true evil was vice. Everything else, wealth, fame, pleasure, pain, even life and death, was merely indifferent. But Cato didn't just study Stoicism. He lived it. He slept on a hard bed when he could have afforded silk. He walked barefoot in winter to harden himself against discomfort. He ate simple food when the finest delicacies in the world flowed into Rome from every conquered province. When his friends mocked him for his austerity, he simply quoted Socrates, "I eat to live, while others live to eat." The contrast with his contemporaries couldn't have been starker. In one corner of Rome, young Julius Caesar was learning how to seduce women and bribe officials. In another, Pompey the Great was buying his way to glory with gold won by his father's sword. And in the Forum, a young lawyer named Cicero was discovering that a silver tongue could accomplish what an honest heart could not. But Cato was becoming something Rome hadn't seen in generations, a man who truly could not be bought, swayed, or broken. His first test came at 19. The position of quaestor was where young Roman aristocrats began their political careers. It involved managing provincial finances, and traditionally, it involved stealing vast sums from the public treasury. Everyone did it. It was expected. A young man served as quaestor, enriched himself, and used that wealth to climb the political ladder. That was how the system worked. That was how Rome worked. When Cato was appointed quaestor in Macedonia, his friends congratulated him on his upcoming fortune. Even the honest ones assumed he'd take what he could. After all, he had to compete with men who were building fortunes through corruption. How else could he afford the games and bribes necessary for higher office? Cato arrived in Macedonia in 64 BCE and immediately fired every corrupt official he could find. He audited the books personally, line by line, discovering decades of theft. He recovered stolen funds and returned them to the treasury. He refused every bribe offered to him, and in a Roman province, bribes came like rain. His subordinates were baffled. "Sir," one nervous clerk explained, "if you don't take your share, the governors who come after will wonder why there's suddenly more money in the treasury than expected." "Good," Cato replied. "Let them wonder. Let them see what honest administration looks like." When he returned to Rome 2 years later, Cato was no richer than when he'd left. In a city where every other quaestor returned wealthy enough to host games and build monuments, this was noticed. Some called him a fool. Others called him dangerous. Julius Caesar called him both. The first time Cato and Caesar truly clashed, the stakes were life and death, though not their own. In 63 BCE, Rome was rocked by the Catiline conspiracy. A disgraced noble named Catiline had gathered an army and planned to burn the city and murder the Senate. The conspiracy was exposed by Consul Cicero, and the conspirators were arrested. Now the Senate debated what to do with them. Caesar, already ambitious and calculating, argued eloquently for clemency. "Imprisonment," he said, "not execution." The crowd swayed, moved by his rhetoric and his reputation. Even the stern senators nodded along. Caesar had a way of making wrong sound reasonable and expedient sound wise. Then Cato rose to speak. He was 32 years old, with no great victories to his name, no consulship to grant him authority. He had only his voice and his conviction, but sometimes that's enough. "Caesar speaks beautifully of mercy," Cato began, his voice cutting through the forum like a blade. "But let us not confuse mercy with weakness. These men," he pointed to the imprisoned conspirators, "planned to burn Rome, to murder you, your families, your children as they slept. They showed no mercy, and they deserve none." The Senate stirred uneasily. "I know mercy is fashionable now," Cato continued, his eyes fixed on Caesar. "I know cruelty is out of style, but there is a difference between cruelty and justice. These men betrayed the Republic, the republic that has stood for 400 years, the republic your ancestors built with their blood. Will you throw that away for the sake of appearing enlightened? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Caesar asks us to imprison these traitors, but who will guard them? What if their supporters free them? What if they escape and finish what they started? No, the only sure protection is death. Justice demands it. Rome demands it. And history will judge us by what we do next. The vote was swift. Execution. As the conspirators were strangled in the Tullianum prison, Caesar looked across the Senate floor at Cato with something between respect and hatred. He saw what everyone else saw. Cato couldn't be charmed, couldn't be bought, and worst of all, couldn't be intimidated. This made him extremely dangerous, but being incorruptible in a corrupt city comes with a price. While Caesar rose through a combination of military genius, political brilliance, and staggering debt, Cato advanced slowly, winning each position through merit alone. He refused to host games. He refused to bribe voters. He refused to make the compromises that oiled the gears of Roman politics. His colleagues found him insufferable. "You're not perfect, Cato," one senator snapped at him after he'd blocked yet another corrupt land bill. "None of us are. Why do you hold everyone to impossible standards?" "I hold them to the same standards I hold myself," Cato replied simply. "That's the problem. We're not you. We're human." Cato's eyes flashed. "I am human too. I feel every temptation you feel. The difference is I don't surrender to them." And it was true. Cato wasn't naturally virtuous, some kind of moral saint untouched by ordinary desires. He loved wine, so he drank less than others. He appreciated beautiful women, so he avoided situations where he might be compromised. He enjoyed comfort, so he deliberately chose discomfort. Every day was a battle. And every battle was with himself. His marriage to Attilia was brief and unhappy. She couldn't understand a man who valued the Republic more than his own family. When she left him, taking their children, Cato accepted it with the same stoic calm he accepted everything else. The Stoics taught that some things were within your control and others weren't. Other people's choices, not within your control. Later, he married Marcia, and their union was stronger. She understood him, or at least accepted that she never fully would. When Caesar's ally Hortensius asked to marry Marcia to cement a political alliance, Cato did something that scandalized Rome. He agreed. According to the custom, a man could divorce his wife to allow her to marry another for political purposes, then remarry her after. Caesar and his allies seized on this, calling Cato a hypocrite. "See," they said, "even the incorruptible Cato uses his wife as a political pawn." But those who knew Cato understood. He had asked Marcia, and she had agreed. It was her choice as much as his. And when Hortensius died and Marcia asked to return, Cato took her back without hesitation. To Caesar, people were tools. To Cato, they were rational beings with wills of their own, even when those wills complicated his life. By 60 BCE, Rome was no longer a republic in anything but name. 3 men held all the power: Pompey the Great, the general who had conquered the East; Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Rome; and Julius Caesar, whose ambition knew no bounds. They formed the first triumvirate, a secret alliance that divided Rome like spoils of war. They rigged elections, passed laws through violence, and crushed anyone who opposed them. The Senate became a theater where the outcome was decided before the play began. Cato opposed them at every turn. When Caesar proposed land reforms that would reward his veterans with public land, bribing them with the Republic's own territory, Cato filibustered for hours until Caesar's thugs physically dragged him from the Senate floor. When Pompey demanded illegal honors, Cato blocked them, even though Pompey could have had him killed with a word. When Crassus tried to expand his already obscene wealth through corrupt provincial appointments, Cato exposed the scheme publicly. "You're going to get yourself killed," Cicero warned him one evening after Cato had narrowly escaped a mob of Caesar's supporters. "Then I'll die free," Cato replied. "You'll die uselessly," Cicero corrected. "Dead men can't save the Republic. Neither can living cowards." The accusation hung between them. Cicero was brilliant, eloquent, and fundamentally compromised. He would bend to save himself, and they both knew it. "I admire you, Cato," Cicero said finally. "Truly, I do. But admiration doesn't win wars. Caesar is taking Gaul with an army. Pompey controls Spain. Crassus owns half the Senate. And you have your principles. What will you do when principles aren't enough?" Cato had no answer because he refused to accept the premise. Principles had to be enough. If they weren't, if virtue wasn't sufficient, then Rome was already lost. In 49 BCE, everything changed. Caesar, having conquered Gaul and made himself impossibly wealthy and popular, was ordered by the Senate to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Instead, he crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, a declaration of war against the Republic itself. "The die is cast," Caesar allegedly said as he crossed that narrow stream. Civil war erupted across the Roman world. Pompey, Rome's other great general, was given command of the Senate's forces. Cato, who had spent years opposing Pompey, now found himself fighting alongside him. Not because he liked Pompey, he didn't, but because Pompey, for all his faults, was defending the Republic. Caesar was trying to destroy it. As Caesar's legions swept through Italy, winning victory after victory, the Senate's forces retreated to Greece. Cato went with them, helping to train troops and manage supplies. He was in his 40s now, past the age when most men fought wars, but he drilled with the soldiers like a young recruit. "Why?" a younger officer asked him one brutal winter morning, watching Cato trudge through mud in the freezing rain. "You're a senator. You don't need to do this." "If I ask them to suffer for the Republic," Cato replied, "I must suffer first." In 48 BCE, at Pharsalus in Greece, Caesar and Pompey's armies finally met. It was the largest battle between Romans in history. The ground was slick with blood, the air filled with screams. Caesar won decisively. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered on a beach, his head cut off and presented to Caesar as a gift. The man who had been Rome's greatest general died in the sand, betrayed by foreigners, seeking favor with the new master of Rome. When Cato heard the news, he wept. Not for Pompey the man, they'd never been friends, but for what Pompey's death represented. The Republic's last great defender was gone. Now only Cato remained. Cato retreated to North Africa with the remnants of the Senate's forces. They held the province of Africa, fortified the city of Utica, and prepared for Caesar's inevitable arrival. But Cato knew they couldn't win. Caesar's army was larger, more experienced, and better supplied. The war was over. Everyone knew it. Everyone except Cato. He spent those final months doing what he'd always done, living according to his principles. He administered Utica justly. He paid his soldiers from his own funds. He studied philosophy in the evenings, reading and rereading Plato's Phaedo, the dialogue about Socrates' death. His officers begged him to negotiate with Caesar. "He's offering clemency," they argued. "He'll pardon you. You could live, Cato. You could still serve Rome." "As whose slave?" Cato asked quietly. "As Caesar's subordinate." "Then not at all." He understood what they couldn't. Caesar's clemency was more dangerous than his sword. By forgiving his enemies, Caesar made himself their master. Every pardon was a chain. Every act of mercy was an act of dominance. Cato had spent his entire life refusing to be owned. He wouldn't start now, not even to save his life. In 46 BCE, Caesar's forces arrived at Utica. The battle was brief. The Senate's army crumbled. Officers defected to Caesar, seeing which way the wind blew. Cato could have fled. Ships were waiting. He could have escaped to Spain or even beyond Rome's borders, lived out his days in comfortable exile. Instead, he held a dinner party. On the last night of his life, Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger gathered his friends and family for a final meal. He was 53 years old. His face was lined with care, his hair gray, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He'd spent his entire adult life fighting for a republic that no longer existed, defending principles that Rome had abandoned. Now he would make his final statement. The dinner was philosophical, as Cato's dinners always were. They discussed Stoic doctrine. They debated whether it was ever right for a man to take his own life. Cato argued the Stoic position. Life was a preferred indifferent, but living without virtue was worse than death. A wise man preserved his life when possible. But when virtue demanded death, he accepted it calmly. His son pleaded with him. "Father, Caesar has promised to pardon you. You can live. Please." Cato looked at his son with infinite sadness. "I've taught you philosophy your entire life," he said. "Did you learn nothing? Caesar's pardon would make me his debtor. It would acknowledge his right to spare me or kill me as he chose. It would make him king in all but name. But you'd be alive. I'd be a slave, and I have never been anyone's slave." After dinner, he retired to his room. He read the Phaedo one last time, the story of Socrates choosing death over compromise. Then he took his sword and thrust it into his own abdomen. The wound was mortal, but not immediate. His servants found him and called for a physician, who stitched the wound closed. Cato lay there, weakened by blood loss, his life slowly returning. Then, with the last of his strength, he tore the stitches open and pulled out his own intestines. This time, no one could save him. When Caesar arrived at Utica and learned what Cato had done, he raged. "You've denied me my clemency," he shouted, furious that Cato had escaped his magnanimity. because that's what Cato's suicide meant. Caesar could conquer Rome, but he couldn't conquer Cato. There would always be this one man who refused to bend, refused to compromise, refused to be saved by a tyrant's mercy. Cato's death echoed through history like a bell. In the years after, as Caesar made himself dictator for life, before being assassinated by men inspired by Cato's example, people spoke of Cato with reverence. Not because he was successful, he wasn't. Not because he won, he lost. But because he stood. When the empire rose from the republic's ashes, when the Caesars ruled from Rome to Britain, Cato's name remained a symbol of resistance. Slaves quoted him. Dissidents invoked him. Century after century, when people wanted to say, "I will not submit," they remembered Cato. The Stoic philosophers who came after, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, all pointed to Cato as the exemplar of their philosophy. Not perfect, but striving for perfection. Not superhuman, but choosing the hard path when the easy one beckoned. He proved something crucial. That character isn't about winning. It's about who you are when everything is at stake. Cato's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Would we do what he did? When the tyrant offers mercy, would we refuse it? When surrender means survival and principle means death, which would we choose? When the whole world is bending, would we remain upright? Most of us, if we're honest, would take Caesar's pardon. We'd rationalize it. We'd say, "I can do more good alive than dead." We'd tell ourselves that compromise isn't surrender, that living to fight another day is wisdom, not cowardice. And maybe we'd be right. Maybe Cato was a fool who died for nothing, defending a republic that was already dead. Or maybe, just maybe, Cato understood something we've forgotten, that some things are worth more than survival, that a life lived without principle isn't worth living, that the only real freedom is the freedom to say no, even when it costs you everything. Cato believed that virtue was the only true good, that a man who lived rightly couldn't be conquered no matter what happened to his body. That death with honor was better than life with shame. He believed it so completely that he bet his life on it. And 2,000 years later, we're still telling his story. Today, we live in an age of compromise, of going along to get along, of bending our principles just a little because everyone else is doing it, and we don't want to be left behind. Cato stands as a rebuke to all of that. He reminds us that character is built in small moments, saying no to the sweetmeat at 5 years old, refusing the bribe at 19, speaking truth when it would be easier to stay silent. Every tiny choice compounds until one day you're the person who can face death without flinching because you've been practicing all your life. He reminds us that losing with integrity is better than winning through corruption. That the point of life isn't to maximize comfort or minimize pain, but to live in a way you can respect when you look in the mirror. Most importantly, Cato reminds us that we always have a choice. Even when the tyrant holds all the cards, even when surrender seems inevitable, even when death is the price of defiance, we can still choose. And that choice, that refusal to submit, can never be taken from us. Caesar conquered Rome, but he never conquered Cato. And that, more than any military victory or political triumph, is why we remember both their names. The question Cato leaves us with is simple but searing. When your moment comes, What will you choose? If Cato's story moved you, if you felt the weight of his choices, and recognized the eternal struggle between principle and pragmatism, then subscribe for more stories of history's most remarkable characters. Because the past isn't dead, it's not even past. And the questions Cato faced are the same ones we face every day. Will you bend or will you stand? The choice, as always, is yours.